Hey, everybody, welcome to this month's LinkedIn Live event, hosted and sponsored by Advise Health. I am Eric Rubenstein, Senior Director of Litigation, Fraud, Waste, and Abuse Support. I'm super excited for everybody to join us for this month's LinkedIn Live event on the art of the negotiation. And I've got two of our longtime subject matter experts. They know more about this entire topic than most people know. I've got Carrie Mead and I've got Joe Croce. We're going to talk a lot about how to negotiate a settlement. And part of that negotiation piece has to do with ROI, right? For me, I know nothing about this. Having been at the OIG for the bulk of my career, as I was telling Joe and Carrie before we came on live today, for me, the negotiation was on the civil sense. If you took $1, the government wants $2, right? Double damages. So there really was very limited negotiation that went on. But negotiation is a little bit art, a little bit science, and it has to do really with maintaining that return on investment. So I'm super excited to have Carrie and Joe here because like most of you who are here to learn a little bit about it, I'm here to learn as well. I just happen to be the guy asking the questions. So first, I want to start with you, Carrie. You've been on our team for a couple of years. You're our lead investigator on one of our Medicaid SIU teams. But tell everybody who is tuning in today a little bit about your background.
I started in this business about 1997 and originally with a Medicare administrative contractor, largely spending the time in their equivalent of SIU, supporting also all requests and subpoenas, as well as all PSC, ZPIC, and UPIC activities. Also involved in supplier audit and compliance unit investigations and offering subject matter expertise for jurisdictions across the country, attorneys, prosecutors, law enforcement from local, state, federal, and all over.
Yeah, so that's great. So that's almost 30 years of law enforcement related support activities. And that's an important piece of the puzzle that we're going to talk about. Joe, you're a fan favorite for us here at Advise because you've got a really amazing story about the entirety of your career. Tell us a little bit about Joe Croce.
Well, I was born at a very early age, and I'll digress. I'll speed it up. All right. So in '81, I became a New York City police officer. Graduated and got promoted to detective, and found myself in a white collar crime unit doing all sorts of investigations, from credit card fraud to bank fraud to wire fraud, and I actually did some doc in the box cases. So I touched on healthcare fraud. Anyway, I retired back in 2002, found myself doing bank investigations with JP Morgan Chase, doing .com investigations with Sotheby's Auction House. I had many different jobs after I retired from the police department. Anyway, I found myself doing healthcare fraud investigations in 2009, and working with a very large MCO in the state of New York, Fidelis Care. And I loved it. I cut my teeth there on healthcare fraud, and I really started becoming passionate with healthcare fraud, and found myself working with you guys here at Advise 2 years ago, and I'm in the SIU now doing the same fighting the right fight,
Now, there is a rumor, Joe, that you had a certain personalized license plate on your car. I don't know if that rumor is true or not. Well, I know it's true, but what did your license plate say at one point?
It said fraud guy.
Yeah,
that was a long time ago, Eric.
You took your love of fraud to an entirely other level by actually having it, embossed on your car. And I've heard the rumor that you actually have the word fraud with a red circle and a line through it tattooed on one of your butt cheeks. I don't know if that's true or not. It's just what I've heard. But
Not true.
Not true. Thank God. All right. Well, so we want to talk about the art of negotiation, and we want to talk about how you ultimately get to the point where you're negotiating a settlement with the provider based upon a fraud, waste, abuse, or compliance issue that has resulted in overpayment. So, Joe, I want to start with you because you don't just get your case and then run some analytics and say, hey, this provider billed $1 million. They're an outlier. Their peers are only billing $500,000. The provider owes $500,000, right? None of this is out of the ether. tell me, when you're working on an investigation and you're getting to this point, what are some of the necessary steps that aren't even the wants to, the musts to, right? What are the must-haves that you absolutely need to do to get to the point where you're arriving at your overpayment identification?
First step is always make sure you have clean claims. And we always start with any claim that's clean over $1 or higher. So we'll make sure that that's within our claims data, and that's the data that we're going to use to identify the overpayment. We're going to make sure that the claims fall within the look back period for that state. We're going to make sure the claims fall in the look back period for that line of business, whether it's commercial, Medicare, or Medicaid. A lot of times they differ depending on the state. So we'll look at those things. So we need to have the right data set that we can derive the overpayment from. And a lot of times, you got to determine, is this a case is the overpayment derived from a medical record review? Is the overpayment derived from a desktop audit where maybe it's maybe the issue is they overbilled NCCI mu edits. Maybe they billed too many units. So that's be administrative take back. That's something, again, you do in a desktop audit. And as long as you make sure the claims are clean, they're over $1 a piece, and that they fall within the look back period, that's going to be the parameters you use, and that's going to be the data you use to identify your overpayments.
Now, a couple of terms before I go to you, Carrie, but you talked about clean claims and over $1. So first, for me, I'm thinking over $1 because if it's under $1, like what's the point, right? The return on investment may be very low. It could be a math error or something. But in the CMS world, there is a definition of clean claims, and many states have definitions of clean claims. And so, am I right in saying that a clean claim is a claim that has not been flagged, it's otherwise been paid and adjudicated as a paid claim? That's my question to you, Joe.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in other words, if a provider submits a claim and maybe it's denied, maybe they put in the wrong ICD-10 code or whatever the case may be, and it's denied and they reissue it. When you get the claims, a lot of times, depending on the payer or the plan, the investigator will get all the raw data. And that raw data you could have 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 claims for the same CPT code, the same member, the same data service, the same issue, but only one of them is paid. And so you need to clean those claims to make sure you're only dealing with the actual paid claim. And that's what I mean by clean claims.
I got you. So it's like it's the final adjudicated claim.
Yes.
I got you. Yep. And then, in the CMS world, a clean claim, and under state statute in a lot of states, clean claims have different definitions. So an important piece of this is that when you're working on these cases, you need to look and see what is the state regulation, if there is one, by the way, on a clean claim. For example, in the CMS world, the regulation says that a clean claim is one that is free of errors and omissions, right? So a clean claim can be something that's paid. It can still be a false claim, which is not the same, right? You can have a false claim, but it's a clean claim. So, Carrie, I want to go to you because you've come to your identified overpayment through your investigative process, right? You've done your record review, you've done your desktop audit, right? Joe talked about the NCCI, or he called them the MUE, the medically unlikely event audits, where you're looking to see, is there some circumvention of what the policies are? You've identified that overpayment. So at what point in this process are you looking to engage the provider when you've identified an overpayment? And at what point, I think different people have different perspectives, right? You've already reached out to the provider. If you're doing a record review, there's already been an engagement, but it's not a conversation. At what point do you look to have that conversation with the provider about, hey, Dr. So-and-so, you owe us X number of dollars?
In the Medicaid world, they actually ask us to first reach out and provide a notice of recovery to the state. We're authorized to move forward with that recovery, and then come my findings letter or the investigative findings letter that detail the findings subsequent to the overpayment. So once I've identified those dollars and the claims associated, and then that look back period, depending on the state you're in, then I assess that within the letter and send that out. I'm usually either sending that in a tracking mechanism or way via certified mail, or I will reach out subsequently and try to interact with them via phone and secure email to follow up, making sure they've had time and the right appropriate people are seeing the findings.
Right. So the key takeaway for me is that it's not inherently the plan's determination as to when that engagement occurs. If you are at an MCO where you're Medicaid driven, for example, there are some state regulatory or reporting requirements that come into play, and you've got to follow that. Let me ask this question of you. If you deviate from that, what could some of the ramifications be? Like, what if you didn't engage the state first or get approval or permission from the state? And it's not to say that you're being rogue, but what if, for whatever the reason is, you went right to the provider and sent an overpayment letter to the provider? What are some of the potential issues that can come up from there?
There are contract obligations in order to follow the requirements by the state. Inherently, we first have to even obtain the vetting process and approval to even move forward with an investigation and outline the parameters in which we're going to utilize. If we deviate even from that, a revised notice of investigation has to be filed. And then once we get to the findings aspect and we're moving on to the recovery, then the point is there's also contractual obligations where those discussions must take place. There could be somehow a stand down that took place in the process, and we would be moving forward on a recovery for something that the Mafuku is actually taking for criminal action.
So let's talk about that for a minute, right? Because you're using a term of art, right? The stand down. So a lot of the people that watch our LinkedIn Lives are within our industry. They're in the SIU and the payer community. Some are not. Some are people that are coders that are just interested in what fraud, waste, abuse has to offer. So you use the term of art, which is stand down. What do you mean by that?
This is an order either from the MFD or from the Mafuku stating inherently that they have some other activity that will supersede what the payer has. So if I have a stand down order from them on a case, then I will take no further action and allow them to proceed. It might be that they have decided to take the full force and all payers involved, fee for service, the whole works in Medicaid, and pursue that recovery on their own and not allow us to individually seek it.
Right. So the point being is that there may be an instance where the state regulatory organization, so you use the acronym MFD, which is Medicaid Fraud Division. Some states have OMIGS, Office of Medicaid Inspector General. Some states have what they just call the single state payer, whatever it may be. But the other one that you used is Mafuku, the Medicaid Fraud Control Unit, which, you know, I would always say when I was an OIG agent, I would always say the Mafuku are our counterparts on the state level. And what I think you're really getting to is the fact that while you as an investigator within the plan have identified an overpayment, there may be instances when there are collateral investigations or parallel investigations or pieces of the puzzle that Carrie Me just doesn't know about, or for whatever reason, the state in one way, shape, or form is telling you, do not pursue this. Now, for those of you that work in the federal side, in the UPIC world, or those that were from the old school ZPICs and the PSCs, the OIG, we typically have what was known as the ZR, the zone restriction, meaning which was similar to the do not pursue. It's not the clock has a time period. You have to renew it. There's a constant engagement that needs to go on. And I think an important piece is, and Carrie, please tell me if I'm wrong on this, but the important piece is that even when there is a stand down, that does not absolve you as an SIU investigator from continuing to update your case file from a regulatory, a policy, and a plan perspective, right? You still need to indicate that the case is not dead in the, it's alive and well, whoever is going to make that determination.
Until they issue the order to go ahead and close it out on our end, we do keep it and keep updating accordingly. Sometimes the question subsequently on the before the acknowledgement to move forward on a notice of recovery can be just clarifying of the terms. Do you really have 98 providers involved in this particular NPI misuse case? Is it clarifying that you really are seeking those types of things and just making sure that we understand the findings?
And I think there's an inherent level of frustration that comes from SIUs that, you make a referral to the Mafuku or to the state payer or whomever it may be, and the case sometimes sits for a year or 2 years or 3 years, and then lo and behold, the case gets returned to you and you have statute of limitation issues. There's always this push-pull that exists between law enforcement and the payer. And, for those that tune into our OIG roundtables, we talk a lot about, I like to use that phrase push-pull. I don't know if it really fits perfectly, but I always use the phrase push-pull because there's always, what the plan is looking to do is bring back dollars, and what Mafuku or the OIG or payer, the regulatory agencies are looking for may be a little bit different, right? The goals are always going to be the same, right? It's preservation of the program dollars, but it's how you get there is sometimes I think where the frustrations lie. I've often said that I thought that it would behoove SIUs to train law enforcement on how SIUs run. Everybody wants to provide training to the SIUs on how law enforcement does things, but nobody ever wants to provide training on how the SIUs run, because it would be a great way to learn, like, why is there that frustration of that one-way street that exists? So I think it's something to consider. So Joe, I want to go to you because, so we've gone through all these machinations, and now we're coming to a point where we're going to send out that overpayment letter. And obviously these letters, for the most part, are templated type letters, right? For consistency, standardization, and to have a streamlined process from a policy. But having done this for a very long time now, and having helped shape some of the templates and some of the letters that are out there, what language do you think either should or shouldn't be in an overpayment letter that goes to a provider? And why should certain language be there and certain language not be there?
Great question. And I'm a firm believer in identifying this document as an overpayment determination letter. It just rolls off well. It's not offensive. It's just and making sure this gets to the billing department, because this is a common thing for the billing department to receive overpayment letters, offsets, all sorts of stuff. And so if you make the subject header overpayment determination letter, that's a key in the right direction. I think these letters should always be in a good template where you're addressing it to the name of the TIN and attention billing department, as opposed to if you're just investigating Dr. Smith. If Dr. Smith works for ABC Pharmacy, make sure it goes to ABC Pharmacy. Your first paragraph should describe what your responsibilities are to, if it's a Medicaid case, to the state to review claims, periodically to review claims. You should have a paragraph in there describing the fact that you had requested records from this provider group and you had certified professional coders or medical review team conduct a medical record review, and these are the findings. If there are multiple CPT codes involved with the audit findings, the medical record review findings, try to keep it high level, try to keep it brief, but be pointed. Explain exactly why the overpayment was identified, whether it was upcoding or whether it was unbundling, and provide some of resources so that the provider has an understanding of why there's an overpayment letter. It's always helpful to include a chart, especially if you're doing extrapolation, where you explain how many records were reviewed, how many were in error, how much was paid, how much was paid in error, and then the extrapolation numbers, so that they'll see the identified overpayment is equivalent to this because of this reason. You'll also include in your overpayment letter a location, whether it's a lockbox, where the overpayment should go. Very important. You should also include a paragraph in there on if they don't agree with your overpayment, where they can send a rebuttal or send their appeals documentation. And again, include, your name, the address, fax numbers. It's important that if you email these overpayment determination letters, that you sent them secure email, that they're encrypted. If you fax them, make sure you keep a copy of your receipt, your fax receipt, that it was successfully faxed. And if you mail it, I urge you to send it certified mail. So you do have a tracking system on that. And those are my recommendations as far as sending out these overpayment termination letters.
So Carrie, I just want to kind of parlay a little bit off of that from what Joe was talking about. Now, and we've talked a lot and we've done training for some of our SIU clients on checklists and templates for investigations. And I know, we always talk about the fact that we're not huge fans of checklists and templates for investigations, because every investigation is unique. Even two investigations that involve the same specialty type of provider and things of that sort, there's still a level of uniqueness. And the fact that investigators shouldn't just be robots, they should be independent thinkers. But there is something to be said about using form letters and templates from a process improvement and from a workflow, right? And you use those pretty frequently. Talk to me a little bit about, sort of from that process, the consistency, from a training perspective, being able to have these, how it really differs from templates and checklists from an investigative perspective.
The nice thing about the templates and utilizing that predetermined wording as much as possible is helpful, because then you can focus really on the investigation and the explanation thereof itself, and not so much the monotony of the wording. Something simple as whether you're doing a claim by claim recovery or you're doing an extrapolation, there's different wording that goes in accordingly. You can add that. For each CPT code, usually, like Joe said, there's a very good way to articulate it, but very, very distinctly, not getting too wordy, not spending a tremendous amount of time. One of the things I do is tell people to go search out there for the other cases with those codes and see how many deviations you come up with, because each case needs to be tailored. Ultimately, it needs to fit your investigation. But rather than reinventing the wheel each time, it can be easily sought out with prior examples.
Right. It helps to create efficiency, and
For sure.
efficiency will drive a return on investment, right? So,
For sure.
Joe, I want to go to, so Joe, you and Carrie have both had the ability to have worked within Medicaid, Medicare Advantage, and commercial, right? Which is unique, because in a lot of SIUs, people don't necessarily get that differentiation. In the Medicaid space, it's really unique because Medicaid gets its funding in part from HHS, CMS, right? And that's known as the FMAP. It's the federal matching for Medicaid. And that percentage varies. It is generally 50% of Medicaid dollars are CMS or government money, and 50% is Medicaid money, but there could be some vacillation. When you're negotiating a settlement, let's talk about some of the differentiators. For example, in the commercial space, you might negotiate a settlement for a percentage that is vastly different than you might negotiate a percentage on a Medicaid claim. How do you come up with, is there an industry standard, or is it really based upon what the plans are saying? Here's our bottom line of what we're willing to do.
It really is tailored to the plan. Every plan, and again, working in a consulting firm like Advise, who represents many health plans, each health plan has their number. Some health plans want dollar for dollar recovery. Some health plans are willing to negotiate the 50%. Traditionally, 50% was the number. Years ago, 50% was the big dollar number that people were willing to negotiate on, 50 cents on the dollar. I've seen it gone up over the years. And I've seen it go as high as 75%. And like I said, there are plans out there looking for, you were overpaid 50,000, they want the 50,000 back. Sometimes it depends on where the SIU falls under. Do they fall under the legal department? Do they fall under the compliance department? I also want to reiterate that when you're negotiating, you need to go in with your bottom line. You need to know what that number is. So when you're negotiating with the provider, you know what the bottom dollar line is. And it's important for you to almost be the middleman, even though you're doing the negotiations. Don't be afraid to tell the provider, listen, I have to present the plan with this offer. I don't know if they're going to agree with it, but I will present this offer. Get a starting line there. And then you could always come back and just say, hey, listen, I spoke to my supervisors, and they went to legal or they went to compliance, and they're not going to agree to less than this. And you can come back with the second number. At least let the provider come up with the first offer. And then you could always come back, and again, you can always use that as a time buffer. And it also takes you out of being the bad guy. You're now the middleman. You're negotiating between those guys, the plan, and the doctor. And it really does help the negotiation process. The doctor doesn't start screaming at you, you're the middle guy. I'm just the messenger, doc.
It's funny. While you're describing this, the very first thing that I'm thinking of is I'm buying a car, and you're the guy who says, I need to go talk to my manager. And you go into another room and you have a cup of coffee with your manager. You don't talk a thing about it. You come back and you go, my manager's in a great mood today, and he's willing to let you settle it for this. So, but it is. So there's a little bit of art, right? There's a little bit of science. The science being, was this a statistically valid random sample? Was there an extrapolation? What's the bottom line number? What's interesting is, and Carrie, I want to go to you because you're currently working 100% in a Medicaid space. If the amount of money that was received is all Medicaid money, and you're negotiating a dollar amount that's below that dollar amount, then not that I'm saying that providers are getting away with this, but if you've identified that there's $100 in an overpayment, right? We're not going to call it fraud, waste, or abuse because we don't know. We're saying it's an overpayment. But if you have a provider who you've identified has a $100 overpayment and it's Medicaid, $50 of that is Medicaid money from the state. $50 of that is Uncle Sam's money. Are you willing, you have to think about, is there a willingness to go below that 50%? Because to some extent, someone might argue, well, the other 50% is not my problem, right? Only 50%, it's only half my problem, but it's really all your problem. But at the end of the day, it still gets back to that return on investment argument, right? Because if your provider doesn't negotiate a settlement with you, they're going to look to go to arbitration and ALJ, and then the cost of that could far exceed the value of the negotiation. So that's where that art and that science are. But talk a little bit about, like, when you're doing your negotiations, how much in your mind are you thinking about what percentage of that overall amount of money is Uncle Sam's versus how much of that is the state's? Or does that not come into play because the goal is to resolve the matter with the least amount of stress and rub and just kind of get it to move on?
For me personally, I came from a world where there was no negotiating on dollars. You were paying it back in total, and a lot of times with interest. So I do tend to have that mindset as I go in to the Medicaid world, and then on some of the commercial dual cases that I have, I look at not only claim savings, cost avoidance dollars that might have been included, as well as the recovery. If they're deviating from what I think is, I never go in at 50%. I would never. I usually explain that I am required by the state to explain why I deviated from the identified overpayment. And if there isn't a justifiable reason, then I'm going to have a hard time selling that needs to be reduced. If you're telling me it's hardship, then I want to ultimately see tax returns. I want to see the proof where that is not something you're able to do. I'm always looking at what's their ongoing monthly income. Have they ceased billing entirely? Are they still getting an income? Because at the end of the day, if they're not willing to meet at a reasonable dollar, then I will recommend to just take a manual reduction on it.
Right. And what you're really talking about is when you were on the government side, there's really no negotiation.
No.
It's my way or the highway, and I'll see you in court. And however that, because if that
Yep.
doesn't work out, then it could be a referral to OIG or U.S. Attorney's
Yep.
Office or whatever. So, Joe, I want to, and as we get ready to wrap up, I want to go to you for kind of this final little thought. And it's the piece of the puzzle that Carrie kind of just alluded to, which is, are they no longer billing the program? Are their billings going down? And so it gets into this kind of this last piece of the puzzle, which is offsets and the whole premise of offsets. So talk a little bit about what is an offset, why do the payers use it, and how is that a tool to be used in payment integrity?
So again, and speaking layman's terms, is the provider or provider group tells you to go pound sand, basically you're not getting anywhere with the negotiations. Then it's time to go into the offsets. And an offset is basically offsetting future claims from being paid to this provider. This is a process that goes through payment integrity groups at most plans. And basically, it's a two-pronged thing. You need to, number one, make sure that the 60-day appeal process has expired, that period of time when the provider can appeal has gone by. And you have to make sure that this provider you have to verify that the provider is still submitting claims to the plan. If they stop submitting claims to the plan, then offsets is going to be fruitless. So that's basically where you're at with the offsets. I mean, it's the last place you want to go, but it's usually the most efficient way to get money back to the plan is through offsets.
Right. And that's what I'm thinking. When you're talking about offsets, to me, it's what you're looking to do is recover past money on future earnings, right? So you're saying to the person, you don't want to play by the rules by making this overpayment or negotiating or doing whatever. If you want to continue to be a proud participating provider in our network or out of network and get paid, you're going to have to pay this money back by hook or by crook. Now, am I correct in the assumption that if you do an offset, the offsets are going to be at 100% of what the overpayment calculation is because the provider hasn't negotiated in good faith?
Correct. And sometimes that's the hammer you can use when you are negotiating. Listen, if we're not getting anywhere, if you're not willing to bend, then my next step is to submit offsets. And, if the doctor realizes, hey, I'm going to be using this health plan because most of my customers, most of my patients are using this health plan, then it's going to behoove me to negotiate some kind of settlement because otherwise it's going to be 100% take back through future offsets.
Right. And Carrie, just to kind of close this out as we run out of time, but one of the issues becomes if the provider is no longer billing the program, right? An offset is essentially an empty check, right?
Unfortunately, yes, but we do respond back to the state, letting them know if we're able to do anything or not able to pursue that. They do. I know certain states are interested in that, and they will potentially take those underneath their own projects. So we do get some support there, but yes, we get a lot. You can't have a negotiation unless there's two parties actually negotiating. And that does happen. They stop billing, but when I look back and find them doing it again and not too very long, we can certainly deal with it. The golden rule is see what you can get on a lump sum payment down, even if it's at a reduced amount. So we get the most upfront and potentially no more payments for other than 12 months. The likelihood of you actually seeing that money over a course of a year isn't always good. So there's certain providers that, yes, to get them to stop billing is a cost avoidance alone, and it's dollars that we can quantify.
Right. And what you're really talking about is if you do negotiate a settlement, it's potentially here's a lump sum of money and then a payment plan that goes on.
Yep.
Not unlike what would happen in a civil settlement with the government on a federal case or a Medicaid case. So yeah, look, there's a ton that goes on with this stuff, right? I mean, it's not just coming up with what that overpayment is. We could probably talk and we probably will, but we could talk about how do you even get to that point, right? The investigative process of the record requests and attestations that providers should be sending in. One of the things that we just learned recently, one of our SIU clients, they would request medical records and they didn't have an attestation, and they had a very high appeal rate. And I would say to them, you have a very high appeal rate because providers are now bringing documents in that they didn't provide previously. If you had an attestation where they're saying this is the totality, that works for you because they're admitting that they're doing, that they're giving you whatever they can give you. So it's a huge piece of the puzzle, right? Because at the end of the day, in the SIU space, in the payment integrity space, it's recovery of dollars to maintain the solvency of the plan. People can come up with whatever reasons they want about why recoveries occur, but at the end of the day, it's a mechanism to keep a playing field level for providers who want to participate based upon what the rules are for that plan. I always tell people that when you are submitting a claim to a plan, it's a privilege, not a right, because there's open season to get into plans and this and that. So it becomes very complicated. For me, one of the most complicated things that I've been learning about is negotiating that percentage of what you're willing to take at the end of the day to make the matter go away so that you can move on. When the Joe Croces and the Carrie Meads of the world are spending an inordinate amount of time negotiating a settlement, those are things that you're not able to work on other things, right? And that push-pull of that workflow comes into play. So this has been great. I did learn a lot about this. I knew nothing about payment integrity really from the settlement perspective. So this has been a great education. You guys have a lot of information. We could probably talk about this for hours on end. So thank you both for taking time out of your day and not having lunch while we did this. I appreciate it. The union says I have to give you a 30-minute lunch break and 2 15-minute breaks during the morning and afternoon. I'll let you combine the morning and afternoon break. Take an hour on Advise, please. So thanks, as always. I appreciate you both taking the time. Thanks to the people that have tuned in for this LinkedIn Live. We appreciate you spending the time. As always, you can get our newsletter by sending us an email at hello@advise, ADVIZE health.com. You can get our newsletter delivered right to your inbox every Friday. You'll get links to recordings of previous LinkedIn Lives available. You'll also get a copy of the recording of the OIG Roundtable, which we put out for every Friday. You'll also get tons of other content and information about things going on in the fraud, waste, abuse, and compliance space. So please drop us a line at hello@advisehealth.com for that. Also, tune in to our April LinkedIn Live. I've got 2 great guests that are coming on. We're going to be talking about what wound up being a very large national case that had a lot of legal implications regarding medical necessity involving interventional cardiology. So I'm looking forward to that discussion with 2 experts, lawyers who worked on a very large case involving a doctor that was prosecuted for medically unnecessary stent placement. So it's going to be a great April LinkedIn Live. So as always, we thank everybody for the support. Again, you can find us on LinkedIn. Just jump on LinkedIn, look for Advise, follow us, follow all of us individually, follow Advise as a company. And again, thanks very much for tuning in to this month's LinkedIn Live. We'll see you at the next one. Thanks again, Joe. Thanks again, Karen. We'll see you.
Thank you.